Mazel tov to our filmer, Mrs. Ostreicher, on the becoming a Bubby.
Thank you very much.
Where we left off last time is on page 55, and today our discussion of the Parsha will be about Hanukkah, and we will relate it directly to our discussion in the KUZARI today as well, as we did a couple of weeks ago. We were up to the philosopher explaining to the Rabbi that if you want to really find a solution to your quest, which is what is the proper way to live your life, then really it's the perfection of your intellect. That's really what life is all about. And attach yourself to the active intellect, which we explain what that is. And as he said on the bottom of page 54, once you've integrated this philosophy within yourself, you need not concern yourself with which specific dogma, set of rituals, and other actions and choice of words or language you follow. If you like, you can even make up your own stuff. There's really no requirement for you to follow any particular regimen of religious activity, because it's not about physical behavior. Life is not about, the purpose of life is not about accomplishing things in this world, but is rather perfecting your intellect in order that you can become immortal and that you can become the perfected human being. And so he says, therefore, in paragraph 20 on page 55, in summation, seek purification of the heart with whatever method works for you, as long as you understand the principles of wisdom clearly. This is how you can attain your goal, which is to attach yourself to that ethereal entity, the active intellect. In doing so, the active intellect may supply you with prophetic knowledge about the future by showing you authentic images in dreams and in visions. And that's really what life is all about, is to be able to have epiphanies and enlightenment in your mind. Anything else is really unimportant, and the only purpose in doing certain things with your life is for that objective. It's all a means to the ultimate objective, which is perfection of the mind. Now, it should be, by now, self-evident why the Khazar king, now we know why we Jews cannot accept that, because God gave us the Torah. But if you weren't Jewish and you were to hear this kind of presentation on what life is all about as a philosopher, and by the way, times have not changed so much. I'm sure that if you were to ask certain people today, especially people who are involved in scholarship and academia, and you were to ask them what's the purpose of life, the purpose of life is the pursuit of knowledge, and that's really what the word philosophy means, as we've explained before. So if the purpose of life is the pursuit of knowledge and the perfection of one's ideas and one's mind, so then what's so wrong with what the philosopher says? What we really need to do is to go back to the story of the Khazar king at the very beginning and think to ourselves, before we read further, what would the Khazar king have a problem with when presented with the experiences that he's already had in his life? Does anyone want to make a suggestion as to what that possibly could be? Remember, I want you to remember to yourselves how the Khazar king began this whole quest. How did it begin? Anyone remember?
Dream?
He had a dream. He had a recurring dream. And what took place in that recurring dream? Does anyone remember?
He says that he wants to be in the right way. The angel says to him that he's doing well, but he's not doing in the right way.
Yes, so what were the words of the angel? Go ahead.
Your intentions are good, but your actions are not good.
Okay, very good. So how do you think that the Khazar king is going to react to the philosopher's recommendation?
Well, the angel said your deeds matter, so that's contrary.
Precisely. The angel is saying that your deeds matter. That's exactly correct. So perhaps now we can better understand, to answer the question, why did Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, in writing this book, choose this story of the Khazar king? He could have chosen any kind of, any cast of characters to present Jewish philosophy. Why did he choose the Khazar king as his story? is because this is a story about a man who was visited in a dream and was told, your intentions are wonderful, but life is not about good intentions. Life is not about what's going on up here. Life is about performance. Life is about what you actually end up doing with your life. And Judaism is a religion of deed more than it is a religion of creed. And therefore, we sort of understand the structure that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is building. And he gives us this indication that his emphasis in Yiddishkeit, his hashkafic emphasis, is going to be on a religion of performance, of a religion of doing mitzvot. And it is therefore incumbent upon Rabbi Yehuda Halevi to explain why the mitzvot enrich the Jew as an individual and actually make him the perfected individual that the philosopher is trying to attain. And contrary to the philosopher, it is not going to be through the perfection of one's mind, but rather it will be through the perfection of one's physical performance of whatever deeds he is called upon to perform. Now, granted, the perfection of one's deeds may require some mental engagement, and of course, as we know from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's other parts of the KUZARI, one has to be mentally engaged, and one has to be a person of kavanah. One has to have the proper thoughts when he's performing the mitzvot. But the thoughts themselves are there to augment and to enhance the activity. The activity is not there to augment and to enhance the thought. So it's a very, very important distinction between the philosopher and the rabbi. And this dichotomous kind of back and forth between philosophy and Judaism is really what the whole book of the KUZARI is built upon. Okay, so we need a reader to see how the Khazar king is going to respond. It's on the bottom of page 55.
I would like to do it, but I don't think anybody's going to understand.
Well, maybe the KUZARI king had a little Latino blood in him. Maybe we'll listen to him from a Latino perspective. Let's see. Give it a try.
No.
You sure no? Okay. Who else would like to be our... Yes, thank you. Bottom of it, so it's that large number 2.
The KUZARI said, your words seem logically sound and sufficient. However, they do not provide a solution for my quest. He said that specific action is not important, and that only knowledge and attitude of the heart matter. I know myself well enough to judge that my soul is pure, and my actions are all well intended before the Creator. Despite this, I still receive a message that my actions were not desired, even though my intentions were. I must conclude that there exists a set of activities which are intrinsically desirable, and not just because the thoughts attached to them are.
Okay, so there, that's the punchline. I received a message that my actions were not desired, even though my intentions were. I must conclude that there exists a set of activities which are intrinsically desirable. Not just the thoughts attached to them, but there's something significant and meaningful in doing things with my body, in doing actions in this world. Now remember, the philosopher is Platonic to the core, and a Platonist believes that the physical world is really a distraction from the world of ideals and the world of perfection. So for a Khazar king to suggest that doing physical activity in this world counts for something is antithetical to the philosophical world. Because what can possibly be accomplished in a physical world that is so flawed and is so distant from true perfection? Yes? So one of the great chidushim, one of the great novelties of Torah, is that the Torah tells us that there's redeeming value in the physical world. That we can take the items and the creations of this world because they are imbued with a certain holiness by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we can actually use them for holy things. I mean, this is really what Hasidic thought is all about to its core as well, is that we are supposed to take the things in this world that represent darkness and we're supposed to illuminate them. We're supposed to use them for things that are holy. So, that's going to be one of our messages for Hanukkah. Something to think about when we think about what Hanukkah is all about. It is the anti-Hellenist type of attitude, that instead of thinking that there's a dichotomy between physical and spiritual, the two are intertwined, and I utilize the physical in this world in order to elevate myself spiritually. So now he's going to bring another argument, and he's going to say that I would like to prove to you that physical performance and religious activity is meaningful, does count for something. And I'm going to be able to prove this to you by demonstrating how devoted the people of the world are to their unique religious activities. And this is how he's going to present it. So please read for us paragraph number 2.
If this were not the case, then how do we explain why Edom and Ishmael, i.e. Christianity and Islam, two nations which have divided the civilized world between them, are constantly warring over religious practice? Each nation is a pure soul with divine intention, where people's practice is
Asceticism,
fasting, and praying, yet they still go about killing each other. What's worse, they believe that this killing is a great act of righteousness and a means of coming closer to the Creator. Each side believes that its way is the path to the Garden of Eden, and do not tell me to follow both religions, because adhering to two opposite faiths is totally illogical.
Okay. So there's a couple of things in this paragraph that we need to unpack. The first thing is that the Khazar king is bringing a proof from the fact that the two major civilizations of the world are constantly warring over religious practice. And it seems, therefore, that he's arguing that truth lies with the masses, that if we look at the world today and we see how much people are willing to even give up their lives for the sake of their religion, for the sake of their religious principles, not just religious principles, but so that they can live their lives either as a Christian or a Muslim, it must mean that there is significance to these behaviors. So on the one hand, he seems to be arguing that if this is the way most people of the world are behaving, there must be truth that lies with the masses. And there's a part of us that would argue and say, well, if we're going to extend that argument, then we should say that whatever religion is subscribed to by the largest number of humanity should be the one that makes the most sense. Because if the argument is that most people are behaving in a certain way and truth lies with the masses, so then let's just subscribe to whatever religion is subscribed to by the most people. And it seems to be that the Khazar king is sort of enamored. One of the reasons why he is enamored by Christianity and Islam is because it is subscribed to by so many people. Judaism, as we'll see later on, is the last religion that he consults. And in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's mind, the reason why it's the last religion that he consults, at least one of the reasons, is because it is subscribed to by a relatively small percentage of the population. So therefore, if only a small number of people subscribe to it, then it probably doesn't have as much truth or authenticity to it, because the proof is in the pudding, right? And as the more people that subscribe to something, the more sense it obviously must make. There is a certain truth in what he is saying, but only to a certain degree, because we do believe that people can be easily fooled, but at the same time, over the course of centuries and over the course of a very, very large population, you can't fool people for any extended period. You can't fool all the people all the time, right? That's what Abe Lincoln had said, I think, wasn't it? Abe Lincoln? I'm not sure. But in any event, there is truth to what he's arguing. The only thing that he gets wrong is that the attractiveness, the appeal of Christianity and Islam is because it's based upon truth. Christianity and Islam is something that the world gravitates to because every person has a natural resonance. Because we're all created in the image of God, we tend to gravitate towards truth. We tend to gravitate over the course of time and over the course of a mass population. People tend eventually to gravitate towards goodness and truth. At least that's the belief that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi presents over here. Does that mean that it always is that way? No. For short periods of time, humanity can descend into tremendous darkness and become extremely corrupt. But eventually, if we extend history long enough, eventually humankind gravitates and moves towards the light. And so that's really what one of the arguments that the Khazar king is making. And there must be something to religious practice, otherwise people wouldn't be so dedicated to it. He hasn't chosen between Christianity and Islam because they both seem to have an equally viable stronghold on the world population. Christianity and Islam at this point in history are pretty much equally divided in the Western world as far as their seat of power. And there are constant struggles back and forth, especially taking place in the European continent between Muslims and Christians. It's a very famous episode of how, in the 8th century, of how the Muslims nearly conquered all of Europe. It was only because of a war with a fellow named Charles Martel that he was able to get them to stay down at below a certain point in the Spanish Peninsula. But had it not been for that one moment, all of Europe would be Muslim, just like it's becoming today. Right? Whereas today, the European continent is being Islamicized without a shot even being fired, just because of the population demographics. Yes, and the Muslims are very, very smart in their strategy. The Islamic world is, we don't need to fight about this. We can just go to a place in the world where people are apathetic about religion and people are not interested in having large families. And that's our manifest destiny, you know, that we'll retake that which was deprived, which we were deprived of a millennium ago, and we'll just take it again. It was supposed to be ours in the 8th century. We had to wait 12 centuries to get it, but now it'll be ours this time. And that, I think, is really part of the motivation for many Muslims in the world today. There is a belief, at least perhaps being preached from the mosques, that the goal of Islam is world domination. We were on our way at some point, but the Christian world had ascendancy, and now is our time. Now it is our time for us to realize our manifest destiny of the Islamic world. Christianity was also on the rampage, trying to beat down the Islamic world, and they were also unsuccessful at different outposts, both in the Middle East and in Southern Europe. And so this battle was waging as the Khazar king is alive, and as Rabbi Alevi is recording the story. It is still going on. So, and you find that people are willing to martyr themselves and to kill others for the sake of religion. So obviously, if people feel so strongly about this, there must be something substantive to religious practice. It's not just, it doesn't matter what you do and everything's great, right? Like I said before, everything's groovy. It's not just everything's groovy and everything's cool and everything you do, everything you want is fine. That was what the philosopher's perspective was. You know, everyone can live together in peace, and all we're asking is give peace a chance, and imagine there's no countries, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living their lives in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer. And you know the rest of this. You know the rest of the song. So that's, but isn't that a beautiful world that John Lennon is idealizing for us? And yet, it sounds so beautiful. That's the world of the philosopher. That's where everyone is living wonderfully together because all we care about is ourselves. In other words, and it's not about seeing a certain vision that God has in mind for the world, but rather it is realizing true happiness for each individual, and that's really what life is all about. It's not about a higher purpose. It's about the pursuit of happiness. It's about acquiring well-being for myself. So that's a beautiful world, but also it doesn't provide a sense of purpose. Because once you attain that sense of happiness, then what? Where is the sense of purpose? To accomplish something truly meaningful with one's life. My Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yaakov Weinberg, used to say that if you have nothing that you're willing to die for, then there's really nothing that you have to live for. Those are very profound words, and you really have to sort of think about it a little bit in order to be able to appreciate the true meaning of it. If you have nothing that you're willing to die for, then you really have nothing that is worth living for. Is there anything that is so important that you would give your life for that thing? So immediately the response of anyone is, yeah, I would die for my children, right? Immediately I would. That's the one thing, of course, I would die for my spouse, or some other loved one. But we could easily say I would die for my children, yes, without getting controversial about your spouse. Where do people find their purpose in living? Even if they're secular, they find their purpose in living through their children. In other words, what gives me the drive to wake up every morning? It's to make sure that my children get off to school, that my children are well taken care of, and so forth. You know, it's a wonderful thing to be able to find purpose in life through your children. But if that's the only thing that gives you a sense of purpose in life, then that's also unfortunate. I want to make sure that no one thinks that I'm anti-children. Obviously, it's very important to live for your children. But if that's the only thing that keeps you going in life, and by the way, I do know people like that their lives are somewhat empty, and as a result, they're on the phone 10 hours a day with this child or that child or that child, and they're not really doing anything else except obsessing over and they're vicariously living their own lives through the lives of their children. That's not healthy either, because the Torah wants us to live, you know, if we are so concerned about making sure that our children have good lives, and that was truly the purpose of Judaism, so then no one would ever be living for themselves. Because if I'm living for my kids, then their kids are going to be living for their kids, and their kids will be living for their kids. So who's truly living for any sense of purpose that has innate value in my own life? No one's living their own lives. So there has to be something inherently of value that I can do in my life that makes it worth it for me to wake up every morning, even if, chas v'shalom, I didn't have children to worry about. What makes my life intrinsically of value? What am I supposed to, what is my calling? What am I supposed to be doing? Religion in general, or is even taking Judaism per se out of the equation for just a moment, but religion in general answers that question. It's a question that cannot be answered by science. It cannot be answered by philosophy. It can only be answered by the religious world, which says, here is your purpose in living. There is a goal that you are supposed to obtain that is quite virtuous and lofty and above just the sense of attainment of happiness. And that's what religion provides. And so the Khazar king says, that's what I seek. I seek a solution to my quest in understanding that there are religious values out there that people are willing to die for. And if people are willing to die for those things, then there must be something that they're willing to live for too. And that's what the angel is telling me. I've got to find what I'm supposed to be living for. It's a truly wonderful problem. It's a wonderful problem that the Khazar king is representing to us. But it's something that we should also say to ourselves, what am I willing to die for? Am I truly willing? This is a question, it's a horrible question to have to ask. But if chas v'shalom I was to be offered the prospect of saving my life, but I'd have to renounce my Judaism in the process, would I be willing to be moser nefesh al kiddush Hashem? Would I be willing to die either for, let's say, Eretz Yisrael, to fight for the land of Israel? Would I be willing to die in order to fight for the preservation of Jewish practices? If we are, then that's what makes our lives that much more valuable. Thank God we haven't been asked that question. That challenge has not been, we have not been asked to rise to those questions and to those challenges. But sometimes it's worthwhile to artificially create those challenges for ourselves so that we remind ourselves why life is so much worth living. Yeah? And he says, so that's the second point that I think is worthwhile. And therefore, those who argue, those those New Age people who say that the world would be much better off without religion, right? Imagine a world without religion because everyone would be living in peace. What they're failing to realize is that a world without religion also is a world that is flavorless, right? That is fairly bland and doesn't provide man with a purpose of living. And we know what happens when life becomes flavorless and doesn't have a sense of purpose. That was the world before the flood. And while it's true that perhaps everyone got together at some point and was living without a sense of any division of countries or borders or religious differentiations, but people were still killing each other. Because if you impinge upon my need for personal happiness or my personal gratification, and there are no ethics and morals to dictate other than the pursuit of happiness is supreme, reigns supreme, so that any time that you infringe upon that, I can take the liberty of destroying you. So people make a mistake and think that there would be much less bloodshed without religion, but the reality is that there probably would be a lot more. The reason why Muslims and Christians have been killing each other for centuries and Jews got caught in the crossfire, for most of the time. The reason why is because there's that human drive to dominate the other, and religion was sometimes used as a foil, as we've mentioned before. Okay, and he says, and finally he says, do not tell me to follow both religions, because adhering to two opposite faiths is totally illogical. And the reason why they're opposite is there are mutual exclusivities that exist between Christianity and Islam. Islam professes that both the Old Testament and the New Testament are corruptions of the actual communication from God, and therefore to subscribe to Islam, you cannot subscribe to the teachings of either the Old or the New Testament completely. And certainly a Christian cannot be a true monotheist in the way that Muslims believe, because you have to subscribe to a Trinity in your belief in God, and for Muslims that is idolatry. So there are mutual exclusivities. And so those people who try to say that, I'm a universalist, I believe in all religions, well, that's just a bunch of nonsense. That's just gibberish, right? If you ever hear someone who says, well, all the religions have something of value, they're all wonderful, they're all beautiful, and I'm a universalist, I'm a Unitarian, and I believe in all religions. Well, that too is a person who's found certain value and comfort in religion, in the universal message of religion. But what that person is failing to understand is that part of the thing that makes Judaism or any religion worth dying for is the unique set of principles and the unique set of practices that are unique to that religion. The reason why I'm willing to die as a Jew is not because I want to preserve a universal kind of message for all of mankind, but rather because Judaism, as it was presented to us in the Torah, is something vital for the Jewish people, and it can never be destroyed and never be lost. And if someone were to present to me with the prospect of be a Unitarian and a Universalist, and just accept all of the universals of all the religions, or we'll kill you, we would all have to say, we'll be Moser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, if it means sacrificing those things that are unique to Judaism. So that seems to be pretty straightforward. Is there anyone that wants to comment? Yes.
This would suggest that people who live a good, moral, ethical, productive life but don't adhere to any particular religion live life without a purpose.
No, I think you can find a sense of purpose. Everyone can find a sense of purpose. As I just mentioned, you can find a sense of purpose, and my kids are my sense of purpose. I think a person can also say, my purpose in life is helping the needy. And that person is truly saintly and pious. But at the same time, they don't have the sense, or you don't feel that sense of urgency of saying that I'm doing something that God said is the key to my very existence. And that's an excellent point that you raised. There are some very truly righteous and moral and virtuous people who are not religious individuals. I think the sense of purpose that they find is that they really do believe that they're doing something that achieves a higher purpose something that's greater than themselves. They may not even be able to articulate it, but ultimately what they're saying is that they do believe in some form of God, some form of higher purpose that is beyond themselves. So it is, in a sense, a form of religious expression. It's just not articulated in that fashion. Yeah.
How would you compare that to the person who follows the mitzvot by rote without any kavanah, just does because that's all they know, that's what they were told to do, and they don't do it from their heart or with that good intentions. They're just doing to do without the intention.
Well, it's also a good point. How do we gauge or measure a person's level of fulfillment of their life's purpose? You certainly can't utilize only action alone. And as we'll see later on in the Sefer KUZARI, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi himself says that a mitzvah performed without kavanah, without a sense of intent and thought and premeditation, is also pretty flavorless and is pretty bland and meaningless. So you do absolutely need both. But what the argument that the king is advancing over here is that you can't tell me that a life that is lived without action, without a specific set of behaviors, has any sense of fulfillment of purpose. The fulfillment of purpose can only be realized through a certain set of behaviors that is defined by one religion or more than one religion. That's not to the exclusion of having been engaged in understanding that what I'm doing is meaningful and purposeful. If I do it without that sense of purpose or meaning, so then I'm also doing something fairly empty. It has to be a combination of both the awareness of who I am and what I'm doing this for, coupled together with the actual performance. Okay. So let's go on. So the philosopher has this challenge and he needs to respond. So the philosopher replies, please.
The philosopher replied, "It may be true that the masses of the world believe in organized religion and are willing to kill for it. But the philosopher's religion does not sanction murder. This is because we do not believe that any action inspired by religion, such as holy war, can elevate the individual. Rather, our whole objective is to heighten the intellect."
Okay. And so again, he's just reiterating his position that the purpose of life is to heighten the intellect. So why would anyone want to kill or be killed over such a thing? I don't want to kill anyone. If you don't want to heighten your intellect, be gesund. Do whatever turns you on. You just be groovy and I'll be groovy. Right? We'll all just we'll do our own thing. And to that, the rabbi, the KUZARI responds. Sorry, not the rabbi, but the KUZARI responds.
The KUZARI said, "Is this the only criticism that you can make against the organized religion? What error of other religions could be greater, according to these, than to believe that the world has not existed eternally, and that it was created in 6 days, and that what you call the time cause actually communicates with mankind, despite the philosopher's position that this time cause is elevated above any temporal knowledge?"
So what the KUZARI is going to do now is, and we'll leave this for next time, is that he's going to approach direct conflict not only between the issue of intellect versus behavior, but also the ideological beliefs of the philosophers in their understanding of who God is and what God does and how God interacts with the world. And what the KUZARI's challenge to the philosopher is that your understanding of God and how to conjoin with God is so foreign to the those who subscribe to monotheistic faith, the great three world religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all subscribe to. That there was a revelation, that God revealed to mankind what his desires of mankind was, and that God is an interventive God, he's a providential God, that he's involved in this universe, and that he created it, and that all of these things about God that the Bible describes are really antithetical to the philosophical belief in what God is and what God is not. So therefore, it would be my expectation that not only do you have differences regarding how you're supposed to live your life, but the ideological ideas that you have about God and the way that the world came into being and the way God interacts with the world is so different. So I would have expected that you philosophers should have realized if the truth lies with you, then you should have become the most dominant belief system in the world, and your way of life should be prevailing throughout the world. And we don't see that happening. And we don't see that philosophers are achieving any sense of greater perfection than people of religion. So that's the next direction that we're going to go in. And the KUZARI eventually is going to have to reject the philosopher. He's going to say, there's something missing. You're not providing me with a solution to my quest. So we'll hold it aside here, and we'll come back to that next time.